The wind howled across the prairie like a restless spirit, dragging snowflakes in jagged arcs that cut at the cowboy's face. His horse, a lean chestnut mare named Willow, stomped nervously on the frozen ground, her breath steaming in the gray dawn. Each step sank into powdery drifts, leaving deep impressions that the next gust of wind would try to erase. The world seemed stripped of color. Snow-white fields, skeletal trees bent under the weight of frost, and the pale silhouette of distant mountains that wavered like ghosts in the morning haze. He guided Willow along the rutted path toward the herd, his gloved hands gripping the reins tightly. The wind tugged at his coat, a heavy brown leather that had seen years of wear, but the chill went deeper than any garment could guard. Every day was a battle against the cold, a silent duel with a land that gave nothing freely. He had chosen this life long ago, or perhaps it had chosen him, and it demanded endurance, patience, and solitude. The cabin came into view like a sturdy promise against the desolate horizon. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, coiling upward before dispersing into the gray sky. Even in winter's harsh grip, the log walls radiated a sense of permanence. There were no other lights nearby. The nearest homestead was miles away, hidden behind a ridge or swallowed by the endless plains. The cowboy dismounted, his boots crunching against the icy earth, and patted Willow's neck before securing her to a post. The mare flicked her tail, indifferent to the frost that had crusted her mane, yet her calm presence was a small comfort to him in the vast emptiness. Inside the cabin, the stove roared with heat, and the scent of burning pine filled the air. He knelt to tend it, prodding embers into life with a poker, sparks leaping in the dim glow. A blanket of silence surrounded him, broken only by the occasional creak of the timber walls settling in the cold. On the table sat a small tin cup, its contents, thin coffee, steaming faintly, a meager warmth against the icy fingers of the room. He looked around the cabin, letting his eyes linger on the few possessions that marked his life: a worn rifle hanging above the mantel, a saddle draped over a chair, and a stack of handwritten journals, memories of the past he seldom revisited. Photographs of a family long gone, yellowed and curling at the edges, lay tucked into a box under the bed. He had once loved fiercely, but life had taken that from him. Now, only the rhythm of the seasons and the work of the land measured his days. Chopping wood was a ritual he performed each morning, the sharp thunk of axe biting into frost-hardened logs echoing across the empty prairie. Sweat mixed with snow-dusted hair as he labored, muscles straining against the cold. Each log stacked by the cabin's wall promised warmth, a small triumph over the merciless winter. Yet, even as he worked, a gnawing emptiness persisted. He had grown accustomed to the ache, the silence, the long evenings spent in thought or staring at the fire until his eyelids drooped. Outside, the wind carried distant sounds, nothing human, yet each snap of a branch or creak of ice felt like an intrusion into his solitude. Wolves prowled far off, their howls lost to the expanse. And occasionally, the cries of a raven cutting across the sky reminded him he was not entirely alone in this frozen wilderness. But the presence of life brought no comfort. The prairie demanded respect and distance, teaching him that attachments could crumble like brittle snow. Still, the morning carried with it a strange unease. He paused mid-chop, ears straining against the wind, and for the first time in weeks, heard something that made him stop. A faint sound, almost imperceptible over the howl of the blizzard's tail, a small whimper carried on the bitter gust. He froze, axe poised above the log, listening. There it was again, delicate and fragile, like the cry of a bird caught in a storm. The cowboy frowned. His life had taught him caution. Strangers rarely ventured this far into the winter wilderness, and when they did, they were usually lost or desperate. Yet there was something human in the sound, a quiver of sorrow that tugged at his chest despite himself. He dropped the axe, boots crunching on icy ground as he followed the sound across the snow-laden yard, the wind cutting through layers of clothing and bone alike. For several minutes, he saw nothing save the endless white horizon, twisted fences buried halfway beneath the drifts, and the skeletal remains of bushes weighed down by frost. Then, in a small hollow near the edge of the property, he spotted them. Two tiny figures hunched against the wind, wrapped in rags too thin for the cold, their heads bowed as if the world itself were too heavy to bear. The snow had crusted their hair and eyelashes, their cheeks were red with cold, streaked with frozen tears. They clung to each other, a mirror image of shared fear and loss. The wind caught their cry again, soft and trembling, "Am Mama gone?" He stayed in place, observing them. There was something about their posture, their shared fragility, that stirred a long dormant chord within him. Years of solitude and self-imposed isolation made him wary, yet the sight of two small girls, exposed to the merciless prairie, pierced the armor he had built around his heart. He could not turn away. For a long moment, he simply watched. The cold bit at his fingers, snow clinging to his coat, but he was motionless. The prairie stretched endlessly beyond them, white and indifferent. Yet within that expanse, the girl's presence was undeniable, a small defiance against the loneliness that had enveloped his life. As the sun struggled to rise, pale and weak behind a curtain of gray clouds, he made his way toward them. His boots sank into the snow, each step deliberate and steady. The girls lifted their faces as he approached, eyes wide and wary, hands clutching each other's sleeves. The wind carried his words faintly. "Who are you?" The smallest spoke first, her voice brittle with cold and fear. We lost our mama today. Please." The words hit him like a sudden storm, sharper than any wind, colder than any night. He swallowed, fighting the lump in his throat. In that moment, the prairie, the blizzard, the loneliness, they all faded into the background. There was only this fragile human need, stark against the vastness of the winter world. He nodded, though no words came at first. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his coat and pulled free a thick woolen scarf. He knelt, brushing it gently around their shoulders, feeling the tremble of their bodies against the frozen wind. It was a small gesture, but it spoke louder than any declaration of intent. The prairie was wide, wild, and merciless, but for the first time in a long winter, a crack of warmth began to form. He straightened, eyes scanning the horizon, then back at them. The snowflakes swirled, wind tugging at his coat, yet something unspoken passed between them, a fragile trust, tentative but undeniable. And in the hollow of that frozen world, the first thread of a new story had begun, one that could perhaps warm even the coldest winter of a lonely cowboy's heart. The twins clung to each other as the cowboy approached, their small bodies trembling against the wind. The older of the two, though only by minutes, if that, looked up first. Her eyes were wide and wary, a dull brown flecked with something brighter, a glimmer of desperate hope. Snow crusted her tangled hair and frozen eyelashes. Her lips cracked from cold. Her sister mimicked her every move, a shadow of the same fear and loss, smaller and quieter, clinging tightly to her sibling. The cowboy stopped a few paces away, letting the wind settle his words before he spoke. "Where's your ma?" His voice was rough, shaped by years of solitude and hard labor, but not unkind. The older girl's lips trembled. She died," she whispered, barely audible over the gusts. We don't know where to go. We walked for hours," her voice broke, and she pressed her face against her sister's shoulder, shivering violently. The cowboy's chest tightened. He had expected hardships in life, storms that left the land bare and frozen, but nothing could prepare him for the weight of loss carried in two tiny bodies. He crouched slowly, boots crunching in the snow, keeping his distance until he could read the truth in their eyes. They were not lying. They were not pretending. They were alone. And they were small, fragile, and defenseless against the winter that could kill in hours. "Names?" he asked, his voice gentler this time, softened by the wind and their vulnerability. The older girl answered first. "Lila and June." "Lila, June," he repeated, letting the names settle in his mind like stones dropped into cold water. He studied them carefully. Their clothes were threadbare, soaked in snow, stitched in places with crude repair, as though someone had tried to keep them from freezing but had failed. Their boots were split, their fingers red and stiff, and the younger girl's nose ran, frost forming along the curve of it. Hunger had left them pale and gaunt, shadows under wide eyes. A gust of wind tore through the hollow again, and the cowboy shivered despite his heavy coat. He gestured to the cabin. "Come with me. It's warm inside. You'll be safe there." The girls hesitated, glancing at each other. The older one's eyes flicked to the vast white prairie beyond, then back to the cabin's glowing windows. Fear battled hope. Survival instinct whispered to flee, but another instinct, trust fragile and raw, urged them forward. Slowly they nodded. As they trudged toward the cabin, the cowboy kept a careful eye on the horizon. Snow whipped their faces, biting and cold, but he offered the weight of his coat, draped across their shoulders as he walked beside them. Their tiny hands brushed against the heavy leather, and he noticed how their fingers clung desperately to warmth and protection, as if holding on to him could tether them to life itself. Inside, the cabin was a sanctuary. The stove roared, the firelight danced across log walls, and the scent of pine smoke mingled with the faint aroma of coffee still steaming on the table. The girls hesitated at the threshold, shivering and overwhelmed, their eyes wide at the flickering light. The cowboy set down a small wooden box of firewood. "Sit by the fire. I'll make something to eat." Hesitation gave way to gratitude as Lila and June eased themselves onto a worn rug in front of the stove. The older one shivered, rubbing her arms, while the younger huddled into her sister's side, seeking warmth and comfort. The cowboy moved to the stove, scraping a few frozen potatoes and a bit of salted meat from his supplies. He peeled and chopped while keeping a watchful eye on them. The girls' eyes followed his every move, curious and cautious, but they did not speak. Words were heavy here, and grief made them even heavier. Can we have some bread too?" Lila finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The cowboy paused, a small smile breaking through his rugged expression. "No bread left in the pantry, but we'll manage. Sit tight." He boiled water, softened the potatoes, and stewed the meat, producing a humble meal, but one that smelled of warmth, hope, and care. They ate in silence at first, the only sound the occasional crackle from the fire and the soft clink of tin cups. Each bite was careful, deliberate. Hunger sharpened every sense. The cowboy watched them closely. Their bodies were frail, but their eyes, full of fear and wariness, were alive, bright, and watching him as if measuring whether he could be trusted. After the first meal, he handed them a thick woolen blanket. "Sleep here tonight, near the fire. I'll get more blankets in the morning." The girls' eyes widened. It was a small comfort, but in the brutal cold of winter, it felt like a fortress. They nodded, their lips trembling in relief, and wrapped themselves tightly. The cowboy lingered by the door, boots dusted with snow. He had not planned for children to appear in his life, especially in the middle of a relentless winter. His hands were calloused from years of labor, his heart hardened by solitude, yet a stir of something unfamiliar, responsibility, care, perhaps even the faintest flicker of love, pulled at him. He surveyed the girls again, taking in every detail. The tangle of hair dusted with frost, the faint scars on their knuckles from the cold, the way their small hands clutched each other as though holding on to life itself. The prairie outside was merciless, but inside, the fire crackled, promising warmth and safety. "What if we stay?" June finally whispered to her sister. Her voice was hesitant, fearful, yet filled with longing. Lila's eyes softened. I think we have to. He'll keep us safe." The cowboy overheard, and for the first time in years he allowed himself to acknowledge a thought he had long pushed away. Perhaps life was not meant to be endured in isolation. Perhaps, even in this frozen winter, hearts could find each other, broken or battered though they may be. Night deepened, and the wind howled like a morning cry outside, rattling the cabin walls. Yet inside, the twins huddled under the thick blankets, warmth seeping into their frozen limbs. The cowboy filled a small tin cup with more water, placed it on the table, and watched them settle. He thought of the prairie of storms and solitude, of years spent surviving alone. And yet in that firelit room, with two small lives now depending on him, he felt a flicker of purpose, a reason to endure the winter, to protect, to nurture, and perhaps in time to love again. Outside, The night stretched endlessly, white and silent. But inside, the cabin glowed with a fragile light, a promise that even the coldest winter could be softened by the warmth of human hearts. And for the first time, the lone cowboy knew that life had delivered him a second chance, wrapped in the smallest forms of courage and hope. The snow fell thicker now, blanketing the prairie in pure white, muffling sound and turning the world into a vast silent expanse. Inside the cabin, the twins, Lila and June, settled into the rhythm of life at the homestead, their small hands busy with chores, their eyes learning the quiet patterns of survival. The cowboy watched them from the corner of the room, leaning on a wooden chair, the firelight casting long shadows across the walls. He had never imagined the stillness of his cabin could be filled with such small, persistent energy, a gentle disruption that warmed the heart more than the stove ever could. Each morning began with the crack of the stove and the scrape of frost off the windows. The girls learned quickly how to carry water without spilling it, how to feed the horses and cows, and how to sweep snow from the cabin's narrow porch. Lila, the older twin by minutes, was bold and precise, often correcting June's clumsy attempts with gentle patience. June, smaller and quieter, followed her sister's lead, her wide eyes taking in every motion, every lesson, every unspoken rule of survival. The cowboy observed them, a quiet satisfaction stirring in him. The twins had arrived as fragile, trembling children, but they had grit, a stubborn spark that matched his own. He began to teach them more than chores, how to read the sky for storms, how to follow tracks in the snow, and how to handle a horse with care and respect. His voice, rough from years of shouting at cattle and timber, softened when speaking to them. "Gentle hands, June. The mare can feel your fear." They laughed together for the first time one morning when Lila attempted to brush Willow and accidentally sent a flurry of snow into the horse's face. Willow snorted, and Lila shrieked, stumbling backward, hair tangled and frosted. The cowboy chuckled a deep, rare sound and helped untangle her. For a moment, the cold, harsh world outside felt distant, almost unreal, and the cabin seemed to hold warmth that went beyond the fire. Days blended into each other as the storm clouds gathered overhead. Then came the blizzard, the kind that erased the horizon and swallowed the land whole. Snow fell in relentless sheets, battering the cabin walls, rattling windows, and piling drifts that blocked the porch. Outside, the world disappeared into white, a frozen void. Inside, the cabin shrank with activity. The girls huddled under blankets, telling stories and asking questions about the prairie, the stars, and the world beyond. During those long days trapped by the storm, the cowboy realized how deeply he had begun to care for them. He found himself noticing small details. The way Lila chewed her lip when she was nervous, the gentle hum June made when content, the tiny freckles that lined their noses dusted faintly with frost. He thought of his own past, of people he had lost, of roads he had wandered alone. And yet here in the firelit cabin, there was a quiet proof that life could still surprise, that warmth could return even to a heart hardened by solitude. Meals became small rituals. The twins learned to help with cooking, peeling potatoes, stirring the meat stew, carrying cups of water without spilling. Sometimes the cowboy would let them set the table, their small hands arranging tin plates and spoons in careful rows. Laughter and chatter filled the space, though tempered by the storm outside. Even in the biting cold, life inside the cabin moved with a gentle pulse, fragile but persistent. One night, as snow piled against the windows and the wind screamed like a lost soul across the plains, the cowboy found himself watching the twins sleep. They huddled together, blankets wrapped tightly, faces flushed from the stove's heat. Lila's small hand rested over June's, a protective gesture that mirrored the cowboy's own growing sense of guardianship. He knelt briefly, placing his calloused hand on the back of a chair, feeling the ache of responsibility that he had not known he desired. The storm outside raged, but inside, hearts beat in quiet harmony. The harshness of the prairie occasionally reminded them that life remained unforgiving. A pack of wolves howled beyond the ridge one evening, their cries hollow and chilling. A sudden break in the fence had left a calf exposed, and the cowboy worked the girls into action, showing them how to herd the livestock safely back into shelter. Fear and urgency sharpened their senses. Lila followed his directions with surprising confidence, while June, though hesitant, did her best to stay close to both of them. By the time the calf was secured, their faces glowed with triumph and relief. Evenings became times of story and memory. The cowboy told them of the stars, of the prairie animals, and of the land that could both kill and nurture. The twins, in return, shared fragments of their past, their mother's lullabies, the small comforts of home before tragedy struck. They did not speak of sorrow often, but the small mentions brought a tenderness to the cabin that melted walls built of grief and solitude. Slowly, trust grew. Slowly, love grew, quiet and steady as the snow falling beyond the windows. A turning point came on a cold morning when Lila, noticing frost forming on the cabin roof, ventured out to help shovel the porch. Her small hands gripped the shovel, trembling with effort, while the cowboy guided her movements. "Steady now. Let the snow fall away. Gently, don't force it." She smiled, a little self-conscious but proud. June joined, stacking snow in neat piles. The cowboy watched them, heart swelling with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. He realized then that this, protecting them, guiding them, seeing them grow, had become the center of his world. By midwinter, the cabin had transformed. No longer a place of mere survival, it had become a home. The twins had learned the rhythm of homestead life, firewood stacked in neat rows, meals prepared together, chores divided and shared. The cowboy, once solitary, now moved through his days with the constant presence of life around him, small voices and laughter echoing in the hollow spaces he had once considered empty. Yet even in this newfound warmth, there was tension, lessons in patience, persistence, and the unspoken reality that the prairie could turn deadly at a moment's notice. The cowboy taught them resilience, and in return, the twins taught him tenderness. It was a careful dance, an unspoken negotiation of trust and love, unfolding amid the whiteness of winter, where every day carried both danger and promise. One evening, as snow coated the world in silver and the firelight cast long shadows, Lila whispered, Do you think we could stay here forever?" The cowboy paused, staring into the fire, thinking of storms weathered alone, of silent nights spent in empty cabins, of life lived in the rhythm of labor and solitude. Slowly he nodded. "As long as the winter lasts and beyond." June snuggled closer to her sister, eyes bright with relief. "Really? Really," he said, his voice rough but steady. "You'll be safe here. Always." The wind moaned outside, but inside, the cabin was a world of warmth and life. The twins laughed softly, shared stories, and prepared for sleep by the fire. For the first time, the cowboy felt the weight of winter not as an enemy, but as a backdrop to the warmth that had entered his life. He realized he had found something he had not expected, a family formed not by blood but by care, trust, and the shared fight against a merciless world. Night fell and snow piled higher. The cabin glowed, a sanctuary of human connection, safety, and fledgling love. The twins slept, the cowboy tended the fire, and the storm outside raged without, unaware that inside hearts had found each other, and that life, even in the harshest winter, could be filled with hope. The storm had passed. Dawn arrived slowly, soft and golden, brushing the endless prairie with light that made the snow glitter like a sea of diamonds. The wind had settled, leaving the world hushed and pristine, every branch and fence post coated in frost. For the first time in weeks, the horizon was visible, stretching wide and inviting, a canvas of hope after relentless white. The cowboy stepped outside, boots crunching in the snow, and inhaled the crisp air. His gaze swept the land he had fought to survive in, the prairie that demanded respect and endurance. Yet today, it seemed to glow with promise. The cabin behind him, smoke curling from its chimney, looked smaller somehow, but fuller. Inside, laughter echoed faintly, carried by the wind through open windows, a melody that made his chest ache with a strange, quiet joy. Lila and June were already awake, bundled in thick blankets, cheeks flushed from the warmth of the stove. They pressed their noses to the frosted windows, watching the sunlight spill, over the snowdrifts. The older twin, ever curious and bold, turned to her sister with wide eyes. "Look, the snow, it's sparkling." "Yes," June whispered, her voice soft, awed, "like it's new." It was more than snow. It was a symbol of renewal, of life continuing after hardship, of the possibility that even the harshest winters eventually gave way to warmth. The cowboy watched them from the doorway, leaning on the frame, feeling the strange, tender tug of belonging. He had walked these plains alone for years, but the sight of them filled the empty corners of his heart in a way he hadn't dared imagine. Breakfast was a simple affair, porridge, slightly sweetened with small pats of butter. The twins ate eagerly, but with manners their mother must have instilled long ago, careful not to waste a single bite. He sat across from them, keeping a watchful eye, noting how their laughter came easier now, how their fingers moved confidently over the tin cups and plates, and how trust had finally taken root. "Today," he said, voice steady, "we'll fix the fence." Snow piled against it, and the wind could let the cows wander. "We'll need to work together." Lila's eyes lit with determination. "We can do it," she exclaimed, tugging June toward the door. Outside, the sun reflected off the fresh snow, making every drift look like a field of tiny stars. The twins followed him to the fence, small boots crunching in rhythm with his own. Together, they began the slow labor of shoveling snow, resetting rails, and reinforcing posts with rope. The cowboy guided them patiently, showing how to lift, stack, and secure the wooden planks. Lila was fearless, shoving snow with enthusiasm, while June worked quietly, steady, and careful. But both were learning the land, the rhythm of winter work, and the bond of teamwork. By midday, the fence stood firm again, and the prairie beyond felt safer, tamed for the first time in weeks. The cowboy stood back, hands on his hips, surveying their work. The twins' faces were pink from effort, their eyes bright and proud. He felt a swell of emotion he did not often name. Pride, perhaps, but deeper than that. Love. It was quiet, steady, and terrifying in its intensity because it meant responsibility, connection, and the possibility of loss. Yet he welcomed it as much as a man of his age and experience could. After the work, the twins raced ahead to the small rise behind the cabin. Snow flew around them, sparkling in the sunlight, laughter rising in clear, joyous notes that made the cowboy's heart ache in the best way. He watched as they tumbled and chased each other, snow clinging to hair and coats, their faces alive with freedom and safety. Evening fell gently. The sun painted the horizon in soft pinks and golds, the prairie stretching vast and peaceful, unbroken. The cowboy guided the twins back to the cabin, boots sinking into powder that glittered with frost. Inside, supper was prepared, a hearty stew of potatoes, carrots, and meat. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Candles flickered, throwing warm light on the faces of the three who had, by necessity and choice, become a family. After supper, the twins nestled by the fire, their heads on thick blankets. Lila turned toward the cowboy, a question in her eyes. Do you think we're really safe here now?" He studied them for a moment, the weight of winter, loss, and life's harshness pressing against the memories of his own solitude. Slowly he nodded. "Safe," he said firmly. "For as long as I'm here, you're safe." June let out a soft sigh, relaxing for the first time in weeks. "Really safe?" "Really safe," he repeated, his voice steady and unwavering. "This is home now, for all of us." The twins exchanged glances, shy smiles forming, and for the first time, the word family hung unspoken but understood. They had survived hunger, fear, and loss. They had survived the prairie and the winter. Now, they had each other and him. Night came, and the stars shimmered in the clear sky, bright against the cold darkness. The prairie lay silent, unbroken, and pure, while inside the cabin hearts beat in quiet harmony. The cowboy watched the twins drift into sleep, small fingers entwined, blankets pulled tight around them. He tended the fire, adjusting logs, ensuring warmth would last until morning. For the first time, he allowed himself a smile that reached his eyes, softened the lines of his weathered face. He realized that this small, firelit cabin in a vast, merciless prairie, surrounded by two fragile but brave children, was more than survival. It was purpose, connection, and redemption. The loneliness of years could not return now. The wind could howl, the snow could fall, but inside, hearts had found each other. A week later, when the sun rose bright over the horizon, the cowboy led the twins on a small sleigh ride across the prairie, ropes in hand, laughter echoing in the crisp air. Snowflakes danced around them, sparkling in sunlight, while the cabin receded into the background. Its walls sheltering warmth, its hearth sheltering love. Lila and June squealed with delight as the mare trotted steadily, carrying them across the glistening white expanse. The cowboy rode beside them, heart light and steady, feeling something he had thought lost long ago, hope. They returned home, rosy-cheeked and exhilarated, to a cabin that was no longer just logs and firewood. It was a home. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling into the blue sky, a quiet signal to the prairie. A family had taken root. The harshness of winter, the blizzards, and the emptiness of the land could no longer touch the warmth they had created together. As night fell once more, the cowboy watched the twins fall asleep, peaceful and unafraid. He leaned against the doorframe, looking out over the prairie that stretched endlessly into the horizon. Snow glittered in the moonlight, a frozen tapestry of past trials and future promise. Life remained rugged, unpredictable, and often unforgiving, but it also held laughter, love, and the quiet certainty that they had found each other. He closed the door gently, the soft click echoing in the cabin. Winter would continue to test them, storms would come and go. But this bond, this family, would endure, and for the first time in years, the cowboy felt the profound peace of knowing he was no longer alone, that love had returned to his life in the form of two small, brave girls who had walked through the snow to find him, and whom he would never let go. Outside, the prairie lay white, silent, and vast. Inside, hearts beat in harmony, and the lonely winter had finally ended.